Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Diverse Podcast. I'm here with Somebi this time, who is another one of my friends from Clubhouse actually. And for the first month, I think I was getting your name terribly wrong, which is really
You know,
embarrassing because
you're the one who like told on yourself. I didn't notice
that's
that,
true.
and
Really?
you would be like, "I'm so sorry, I got your name wrong," and I was like, "Did he?" I didn't like hear, and I
I
was like,
was
"Oh, it's okay."
butchering your
Like I
name.
actually didn't. What were you calling me? Just out of
I think
curiosity.
like Somebi maybe something like that.
Uh,
I butchered it completely, which is really embarrassing because you're Nigerian and I'm apparently Nigerian, so I should know these things, but
you're
never mind.
apparently not.
So
Yeah.
I know it now. I know it now. So maybe that's a great place to start. Why don't you give us a bit of a background, let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so like Toby said, I'm from Nigeria. I moved to Canada when I was 7, and I've been there ever since. I am back in Nigeria for a vacation though for 2 months, and I went to University of Ottawa in Canada, and I did a double degree that I just recently graduated from in May in chemical engineering and biotechnology, and a specialization in computing technology. And the reason I did kind of a bit of everything is the same reason that you eventually hear that I'm why I chose my specific career path is because I don't like to pick just one. I like to try different things and my degree allowed me to do that, or both of my degrees, and my career path that I'll be going into also allows me to do that. And yeah, one of the many things that I spoke about on Clubhouse was my job search journey, right from my internships to my full-time offers. I mean, for my internships, I went from applying to hundreds and like driving around to my final internship. I actually didn't even have to apply. The recruiter came to me all by being active on LinkedIn. And for my full-time offers, I was able to get 6, actually 7, but I said 6, and now it's like I'm rolling with 6, even though technically it's 7. But and the one that I eventually chose, McKinsey, is actually the only offer out of the 7 that I didn't apply for. Sorry, that I didn't network my way to. Everything else I got via networking. McKinsey was the only one that I applied traditionally and got into, which is pretty interesting. But I think you wanted me to list my all of my offers.
I want to hear that list, of who didn't make it when McKinsey's on top. I want to know who didn't make it.
Oh man, yeah. Microsoft is a close second. Microsoft and McKinsey, I can't speak enough about their culture and the people. The 2 M's, as I call them. Microsoft, McKinsey, Deloitte, Sun Life Financial, which is a big company here in Canada, IBM, Google, and AWS. So those were the 7. AWS I got a bit later on, which is why I wasn't included in the 6. But I still say, even on my TikTok, I'm like, how I got 6 offers? But I'm like, it's actually 7, but like, whatever. I'm rolling with 6.
All right. Okay. Cool. I mean, and this is going to be a really, really valuable episode. I'm sure there's a lot to learn from you. So maybe for young people out there, I know you create lots of careers content. So this is kind of like what you do. So I've got high expectations for you. But and when you say driving around, just for everyone listening, you literally do mean driving around. So let's start there. What was that all about?
My second internship was unpaid. It was as a pharmacy assistant. That one I walked around. That was in Ottawa, so I didn't have a car then, and I also don't think I even had my license. But that one I was walking around, come rain or sunshine, handing out my resume to pharmacy places until someone took me on unpaid. My third internship, that was actually my first unpaid internship. And I switched from health to tech. So I was now in as a software engineering intern, which is an interesting transition. But that was my first paid internship. And I literally, like, it was almost May. So that's like around the time internships officially start. And I hadn't landed one yet. I'd applied everywhere and I'd networked and I tried. And so I literally took my parents' car when I went back home and I was driving around the greater Toronto area, the GTA. Mississauga, Oakville, like Toronto, like going into buildings that looked corporate like and business like, and just like handing in my resume saying like, hey, like if you have any openings, I'd be really interested in. And of course, a lot of places had already like filled their interns like months in advance. And then one place was like, you know what, we have a project we haven't hired for. And I was like, oh my God, yes, like I'll take anything. And then I had my follow-up interview the same week. And then I got the job like the next day. And the next day was actually the day my parents came back. So it was such like good luck where like they were able to like come back home and I was like, I got a job. They didn't know how I got the job. I told them I just applied. But I got the job and now they know because they've watched my TEDx talk. But then they did not know that I was using the car to drive around, going on highways to go get a job.
Reckless, just handing out your resume left, right, and center. Because when people hear you like rattle off all of like the best companies in the world, they're thinking, oh, she must like know everyone. She must have like the perfect application, never got any rejections. But then as soon as we like dig into it a little bit, you showed like unreal hustle that no people aren't doing. And obviously this is before COVID, right? So you could do that a little easier, I guess. But how many people are going around like door to door to hand out resumes because they hadn't got what they wanted with their applications? And that's just like a slight bit of insight into what you can do when the
Yeah,
door's being shut in front of you, right?
absolutely. Yeah, because people think I do have a big network. And it's like no one you see right now started off where they are currently. Like 99.9% of people don't start off on third base. And you have to go out there and build your own network and make your own opportunities. And that's what I always tell students. You can't expect it to be handed to you. It would be nice if it were. But yeah, I definitely did not start off already having a network. Like I said, I immigrated to Canada when I was 7. And that back then, like now we have a lot of family in Canada. Back then, like we had no one in Canada. And my parents obviously schooled in Nigeria, so they didn't know much about like the ecosystem here in Canada. And so that me and my older sister were really just like making ish up as we go, like trying to figure out like what was and what wasn't. And so that's why it's nice for me to be able to be a resource for my younger siblings now, knowing how things work. But back then, it was really just like making stuff up and trying to like throwing darts at the wall and seeing what would stick. But yeah,
But
that was.
and what? But why though? So like most people wouldn't be that confident. Like most people wouldn't want to. Um, is that the fan or what?
It's the AC keeps turning off.
AC. It's hot in Nigeria apparently,
Oh,
as it always is. So what gave you the confidence to do that? Because most people would think that's crazy. Like, what were you thinking, pretty much?
I literally just talked about this in an interview I did with, and I think I maybe spoke about it a bit in my ebook. I said, like, I thank my parents for teaching me to be audacious, because it wasn't until I was writing my book that I was like, I literally had no business being this confident. Like, I had no business. And they always say it, right? They say that as a kid, you're more confident than like an adult is when you really start to think about stuff. But as a kid, you're not really thinking about much. And when I say kid, I mean, I was literally like, I think that summer I turned 20. So it wasn't that like I wasn't like a kid. But I definitely like credit my parents for teaching me that I deserve to be in every single room as long as I work hard for it. And that was something that they instilled in all of us. So I didn't grow up ever thinking that because I was a woman or because I was Black, that I didn't deserve to be in any space. Like that wasn't even, it's interesting now hearing the stories about it, because that was never something that I was brought up knowing or understanding. And sometimes ignorance is bliss, because I didn't know I can just like go around my life just like doing whatever I wanted and like feeling like, oh, if I work hard, I can be this, not knowing that like maybe there might be systemic things in place that might not allow me to. And I think that when you have that mentality where like you can accomplish whatever you want, and it helps a lot. And so, I mean, I credit my parents for giving me that audaciousness, because I don't think that's something that we have enough of nowadays. And imposter syndrome is real, and so. But it's important to at least try to get your foot in the door and then deal with imposter syndrome later, which is what I always do in all my jobs.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. And I think a lot of successful people tend to think, why not me? Instead of
Mhm.
why me? It's like, well, why
Yeah.
not me? Someone has to do it. And I think, yeah, you're right there. Ignorance is bliss. I think I've got this philosophy that if you don't know sort of exactly how difficult something is, that's better. Like if you sat down a super successful person and like transported them 30 years earlier and said, in order to get here, this is exactly what you have to do. All of these things will have to go right, or you'll have to get through every single one of these challenges. They'll be like, damn, I don't think I can do that. It's almost like not knowing, and you just go and knock on the door. They say, no, next one. It's just kind of, you just dive in without knowing every single detail. So let's dive in then to McKinsey, who was the one you eventually went
Yeah.
for. Let's just dive in a little bit more into the networking, because ultimately you went from applying to lots of different jobs to saying, no, let's scrap that, that's not working, to really being about this whole networking thing. So touch on the content, touch on the tactics. What really worked well for you, do you think?
McKinsey, I applied on a whim. McKinsey is like I said, it's the only one of the 7 that I just kind of I applied. I think I even said this in one of your clubhouse rooms. Like the way my dad and like everyone around me talks about McKinsey, I didn't think I had a shot. I figured they just hired like the MBAs from Harvard. So I wasn't really applying thinking that it could happen. I was still very much like at the time I applied, I was still very much finding my feet. Like I had just gotten into Deloitte. You probably saw from my TEDx talk, I was dealing with terrible imposter syndrome. I didn't sleep for 2 weeks while I was interning there. And so around the time that I was still at Deloitte, I got a call from McKinsey, and I truthfully could not believe it. Like it was just like a random email, like, "Hey, can I call?" And I was like, "There's literally no way McKinsey wants me to work for them." Like, so I didn't really take that first call seriously because I just didn't think anything would come from it. And so I actually interviewed for this first summer role. So I interviewed for summer 2020 intern. A lot of people don't know this, but I actually didn't get the summer 2020 internship. And so I made it through the screen with with the recruiter, and then they have a first round where you do the like a case and like behavioral, and then another round. So I didn't make it past the first round, and so that was a huge bummer. And then that summer was when I started networking with basically every other company but McKinsey, because I wasn't sure if it could even happen again for me. And so from the networking, I was able to get all those other 6 offers. And then around fall was when McKinsey reached back out and they were like, "We'd love for you to interview again." And then I was able to kind of like make it through, which I completely credit to the people of McKinsey for helping me with that, because it was not easy. But yeah, McKinsey is the one that they probably saw my content on LinkedIn, but they'd already reached out to me before I even started like creating content. And so theirs was completely organic, which is what I actually think is nice about it. And I'm a really big fan of like signs. And so I'm like, wow, like McKinsey, out of all of these offers, is the only one that reached out to me, or that I got before I was even like a content creator, before I got active on any platform. So it's like they started with me when I was small.
That's awesome. That's amazing. And it's all everything happens for a reason, right? What was the application process like? I know they kind of reached out to you, but if someone's listening and they also want to join you at McKinsey, what should they be thinking about? How do McKinsey sort of, is there like we really look for these kind of things in the people that apply to us, or is there anything like that you can kind of share to help someone through the process?
Yeah, I think McKinsey looks for people with really interesting backgrounds, people that have really like think in an interesting kind of way. Like my buddy was a software engineer. I think he went to school like in Canada as well. He worked for Google, but more than anything, he was still really interested in like fintech, and his background showed that. And so also fintech is like a huge growing industry right now, and so that was something that really interested McKinsey, was his knowledge in like fintech and like making Bitcoin. Like I know people are trying to like democratize Bitcoin and make it like a thing of everyday life. And so his knowledge in that was what like really interested him. Like I've worked with people that like worked at the UN, people that like have a music background, and it's all about having that interesting story. To anyone listening, knows that you think in an interesting way. And I think that McKinsey is able to kind of like tie those like connect those dots. It's like if this person has this really interesting background, then when we're doing the case interview, which is always a case, you do 4 in total. The way they think during that case is going to be really interesting to see. So mine was that I had my 2 degrees, I had worked in health, I had worked as a software engineer, and then I was at Deloitte working as a consultant in the AI space. And so that was kind of a really interesting story to tell. And in terms of like the interview process, you have the screening call with the recruiter, and then you have the first round, which is 2 interviews with 2 like McKinsey staff, and each of those 2 interviews you have a case and you also have a behavioral. And then the next interview, the second round. So if you make it past the first round, you could do the next one, and it's with partners, so like the big guys of the office. And it's also 2 case studies and 2 behaviorals. And so it's pretty like repetitive. And the reason why they do that is because they want to make sure that like it's excellence at every single stage. That's what my sister told me, because I was like, oh my God, why do they make us do like, it's 2 rounds but 4 interviews total? And she was like, because McKinsey believes in excellence at every single stage. And funny enough, that's literally how my dad thinks. My dad raised us all to be excellent in everything that we do, and so that was really interesting, because he really loves McKinsey, and so I was like, oh, I can see the connection between the 2. But yeah, that's actually how the interview process goes for both like McKinsey and BCG and Bain and all the big consulting companies.
Perfect. And if I want to sort of get prepared for that, are there certain resources I should be looking at in terms of case studies? Is there anything you'd call out on that?
Yeah, there's 2 things I would do. One, you should reach out to people that actually work at these companies and ask them for their case prep material. People are more than willing to give it. Like I have an entire folder of like PDFs that I use. There's not enough time in the world to do all the cases, but if you can do like a good like 30% of them, then you're good. And also just like searching it up on the internet. Like I know there's a website called Case Prep Lounge, where you can actually like meet up with people to like case prep, and they have free resources. There's so many like PDFs, like Harvard has one, Wharton has one, with just like case prep after case prep, because that's what like they do in like the MBA schools. And so use those free resources. It's not that much different. Try to do different ones. So if you know you're really comfortable in like mergers and acquisitions, for example, move on to a different industry, because that's the really interesting thing about these case things, is that you probably end up getting cased in an industry that you know nothing about. Like I think I was cased in like forestry. Like they just had like a random like case question, and it was like something like forestry, like outdoors, and I'm not an outdoors person, and so you really have to like stretch your mind and like think outside of the box. And so do different industries. That's what consulting is for, and that's actually why I chose consulting, was because even though I know that I'm 99% sure that I want to go into digital health, McKinsey still allows me the opportunity to work for different industries and make sure that's actually what I want to go into.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I think getting into consulting is hard enough. You know, it is competitive, it is challenging, but it's even harder if you don't prepare, you know, properly as well as you can. So, you know, lessons there already. Reach out to people, find out how they did it, get hold of those PDF materials, and you really do have to practice these case studies and get well drilled. I think that's what the successful candidates do, right? They
Yeah.
get to the point where they're just comfortable doing that, right? So,
And I think
let's
I was
yeah,
going to
go ahead,
mention that I did that I did repeat when I was restudying for the interview, was that first time around I only case prepped with my older sister. And when you're case prepping with someone that you're comfortable with, you kind of like, maybe you should go and like take a break to go eat, or I'll take a break to go like do this. You want to case prep with people that you're not very comfortable with. And so that's where reaching out to or asking the company that you're interviewing with if they can pair you up with other people that you can case prep with, people that work at the company, so they know what they're looking for. And that was a big difference in the second one. And McKinsey really helped me. They paired me up with like multiple different people that worked at the company, people that were coming into the company to case prep with. And so I was always prepping with people that I didn't even know. Like I would meet them and then we'd start case prepping, because that's what the interview is going to be like. And that's why it's not really, I don't recommend case prepping with yourself or case prepping with a really close friend or sibling. If you can, your parents, or just like case prep lounge online. They can pair up with like random people, and you can kind of get a feel of what the actual interview is going to be like.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And check out Case Prep Lounge. I'm also thinking, you know, sort of within my network of trying to bring people together a little bit more, and you know, finding little groups of people who you don't know who can help prepare. So that could be really cool. Let's talk about content, because I think this is kind of, sorry.
So I just said that the UK is really big in consulting. Like I feel like the consulting companies have a big presence there.
Absolutely, yeah, it is, and everyone wants to work in consulting. I think it's just about deciding, you know, management, strategy. There's a lot going on. In terms of content, then, so explain this, because I think this could be super powerful for a lot of people. You know what? I won't steal your thunder. I'll let you explain you sort of what you've done, what your strategy was, what were you thinking, and how that actually led to some real tangible positive benefits for you.
Yeah. So I guess starting from 2020, I didn't get McKinsey, and my internship at Deloitte was not extended. It was supposed to be, but then because of COVID, they weren't honoring that extension that they'd offered. And so I found myself for the first time in my entire time at university, with an entire summer doing like nothing planned. Couldn't even travel. Like I was like, what am I going to do with my time? And at first I tried to land something, and what I found is that I was actually falling back into old habits. So like the job search strategies that I knew didn't work, but because I was so like desperate, I was like trying to like fit everything into one day, trying to network, trying to find a job. And then I realized that like mid-April that wasn't going to happen. And so my older sister actually challenged me. She was like, instead of like trying to find work, even unpaid work at that time, why not just like post on LinkedIn? Like, instead of only using LinkedIn to network, use LinkedIn to like actually like put your own thoughts out there. And I was like, well, what am I going to post about? Like, I have nothing to say. And she was like, just post about literally your internships. And so that's what I started talking about. Like, I talked about how I landed my internships. I talked about what I was doing that summer. I talked about like hindsight 2020, what I think that could change if I could go back. I gave advice to like my younger self. And I think I actually mentioned in one of your Clubhouse rooms is that the great thing about telling your own stories, that no one can tell you that you're wrong. And so that's one thing that I found a lot of strength in, is just like, I can't tell you how like to solve this really crazy math equation, but I can tell you about my story, and that's really like all that matters. Because when you're a young professional, you're early in your career and you're giving advice, you always risk someone coming at you and telling you that's wrong. And while you can stand your ground, I just personally feel more comfortable shaping it in a way that it can't be wrong because it's my story and this is what I learned from it, and making it personal in that way. And so I did that for the entire summer. And what came out of it was my TEDx talk, which was really cool. So, someone from college in Canada reached out to me asking me to speak at that event, where I actually also talked about my career journey and kind of hoping that I could inspire other students to think outside of the box and believe that they can accomplish bigger things. And I was also able to get my final internship. Funny enough, I was looking for an internship at a startup because a startup is the only place that I haven't worked at. And I had a recruiter reach out to me, went through the interview stages and was able to get an internship for fall. And that was the easiest internship I ever landed because I didn't have to actually apply for it or really like work for it in that kind of way. And from networking, so I would network with like 5 people a week up until August when I started slowing down and maybe networking. Wait, 5 people a week? No, 5 people a day.
What? 5 people a week was already too many.
So that summer, I really just focused on networking and like my physical health. So I was like exercising every day and also networking every day. So 2 to 5 people per day. But I usually tell students who are schooling or working that they should aim for 2 to 5 a week. But if you're really doing nothing, then there's no reason to not try 2 to 5 a week, 2 to 5 a day. Especially if you're like me, you have like a bunch of companies that you were targeting. So I was at first targeting like smaller companies here in Canada, and then I was targeting like the bigger ones. And so that from like April to end of July, I was really just like networking with everyone. And it was from that I would get referred and be like, oh, reach out to this person, or this person would reach out to me for jobs at like Google and AWS and like all the other places. And what's really cool is that I didn't even have to apply. Like they'd be like, oh, can you just send me your resume? And they put me through the process. And what that ends up doing is that it actually shortens your interview stages because you don't have to do the recruiter screen, which I never had to do. I think the only company that I ended up still having to do a recruiter screen for was Google. And that was just to confirm my coding abilities. Every other company, like I just went straight through to the interview. And so that was really like, that's really nice because I hate long interviews. And so that shortened it. And so, yeah, that kind of like encompassed my entire content creation on LinkedIn. I didn't know what was going to come out of it. Like I said, I was just doing it because I had nothing else to do that summer. And so it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool looking back and like knowing how scared I was to put myself out there, because I know a lot of people are scared to make the jump and post on LinkedIn. But I'm so glad I did. And it's not to say that you can't land jobs through LinkedIn without posting online or without posting content, but it definitely helps to show off your personality.
Yeah, I've got quite a few questions to follow up on that because I think this is just amazing, to be honest. So explain the both pieces, I guess. So firstly, content. So what kind of things were you were posting? Because I think you also mentioned a couple of articles that you did within the, I think maybe in the health tech space, which is the area you were thinking about going into, right? Because I kind of have this philosophy that I think it's similar to you. If you really want to get into a certain area and you don't have any experience in there, you can literally, like, let's say I'm desperate to get into marketing in fashion, right? And I can't get an internship, I can't get a placement. You can start blogging about fashion and the trends in marketing within fashion. And, you even started atting the companies, right, that you were interested in so that you get notified to see it. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's literally just like, it's like create your own opportunities. You know what I mean? It's like what you said, if you're interested in blogging and fashion, then create a blog. Like there's so many free ones you can just like do on your own and create a portfolio. That's what I always tell students. People always think a portfolio is like a fancy word, and it's like, it could literally just be a Word doc. And it's just like you writing about like fashion trends, recreating marketing campaigns, pointing out what's wrong in a marketing campaign and improving it. You know what I mean? Like the world is really your oyster when it comes to experience. You can make your own experience, you can make your own opportunities. And so that's what I did. It was actually AI. So before I even like kind of narrowed in on health tech, I knew that I wanted to work in the health AI space. I just didn't know like what stream. And so I was writing articles and I created this hashtag called AI takes over COVID or something like that, like how AI can help us in this COVID era. And so all of I think I wrote 4 articles and they were all related to like a specific industry and how AI can help. And so it was AI in health or AI and like business or AI. And like, I think I wrote one about how Cisco and IBM helped to kind of revolutionize how we work in the office in a post-pandemic world. And the one I actually wrote for the startup that I ended up working at was about AI and like the oil and gas industry. So how AI can help this very tumultuous industry that's going through a lot of changes, especially during COVID. And each time I would obviously at the company And it honestly just like, it's so easy, and people always think it's like, it's so deep. It's like, honestly, just go to their website or just Google search like Cisco AI COVID. You probably have like 3 articles. Read the 3 articles, summarize it in your own words, like maybe pick out some things that really interested in you and like what you're excited to see for the future at the companies, and that's it. And that's sort of what I did for Valogy, which is a startup I ended up working at. I talked about, I think it was like a really short like LinkedIn post just talking about like what they were doing in the oil and gas space, and that caught their attention. And I think that's really what helped me like land the job, because they were like, oh, she's obviously interested. She's done her research. I'm not actually, the CEO did tell me that one of the CEO and founders was like, that was one of the things that impressed us about you, was how much research you'd already done even before you'd even gotten the interview. And you would think it takes so much energy, but it was literally like 10 minutes of my day just like quickly reading a blog post about what they do and just like writing about it.
Yeah, it's so incredible, right? I mean, we're in a world now where employers are getting so many applications, and they don't want to go through all these applications, which is why sometimes they don't mind there being corners cut when it comes to networking and building rapport and being like, oh wait, I really like Somebi, so maybe I could just skip a step and she can come straight to the interview stage. Or you're showing through your content that initiative, that passion that you've really got, and it just helps them cut through the weeds. And the
Yeah.
funny element of this whole thing is like you can just completely, it can just easily be an arbitrage of you go to YouTube, find a couple of things, go to Instagram, find a couple of things. Oh, I
Yeah.
really want to get into investing. So now I'm going to go over to Google, find out some of the latest trends, or Twitter. And now I'm just going to compile some of that information, quick LinkedIn post, maybe try and connect to hiring managers or talent acquisition. So I would usually go for head of talent acquisition or talent manager or whatever, start connecting with those people. And then, as you say, at the company. So when we say at the company, that means literally the at symbol that you'd have on an email, and then just type the company's name. This works most, I think, for smaller organizations because they're more likely to see it. So if you at the organization, then you put their name, they get notified when you put your post out, and then they can see you and they start to know your name and so on.
It's more, your post is more likely, if you're at a bigger company and you have a lot of people in your network, and not even a lot, like at least 500, your post is more likely to show up on the feed of people that work at those companies. And that's actually a really good thing that you said, sending it to the hiring manager. So if you write a thought piece, so a piece that can like engage or stimulate conversation, and you send it to a hiring manager, just being as a form of introduction, like, hey, I really love your post on this. I actually wrote a similar post on this. That's a really good way to like introduce yourself. And so like I had never thought of that, so that's pretty good.
Perfect. Yeah, and let's now talk about the networking a little bit more in detail. So you mentioned, having your target companies. I want you to explain exactly what you mean. And then also, what kind of things were you putting in these messages? So you've just alluded to a type of thing you could say, but I think there are a lot of people out there listening that don't network currently, and they find it a little bit daunting. They don't know what to say. They've messaged a couple of people. Maybe now they've heard the podcast a few times and they've messaged a few people, but no one's replied. So they feel a little bit like, well, they don't want to talk to me. They feel discouraged. So what do you do well, do you think, when it comes to networking? You already mentioned the volume, that matters, but what kind of things are you putting in the message? And what's your advice to anyone who has not been getting replies and doesn't want to do it anymore, kind of thing?
I actually just made like a TikTok video. That's one of the mass creation TikTok things that I literally just made. And I said, what should you do if no one's responding to your connection request or your LinkedIn message? And my response was, who cares? Move on. Because networking is quality and quantity. Because you never know if like who's going to be that one yes. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't treat everyone with respect. You absolutely should. You just never know which one it's going to be. And so you should never put all your hope into like 5 people. Why not 500? Because then like you have a better chance. And in terms of like how I got good at networking, I talk about this a lot in my ebook. I call it the tiers of networking. So I start off by networking with smaller organizations that are still in my industry. So like it can be health tech or AI, but I started by networking with them, and that allows me to get better at talking, get better at answering the typical networking questions, like tell me about yourself, before I go to like my really target companies, because I wouldn't want to start off networking with a Google employee if that's my target, and then end up like completely messing up what I'm saying. I remember the first time I answered the "so tell me about yourself" question. I think I spoke for like 6 minutes, which obviously every like career coach will tell you that you should only answer for like under 2 minutes. And so that's the kind of one of the things where I try to do it in tiers. So instead of going straight to like the really like your dream company, start off with someone that's still in your industry, but maybe it's not like a big dream company, but it's a dream industry. And so that's what I did for like the first month or so, and then I went into more so like my after target companies
Yeah.
like in the next 2 months.
And when you say, networking with these companies, are you going to LinkedIn, you're sending a message and you're trying to set up a phone call, a video call, and you're sort of saying, I'd love to hear more about your experience and your role, that kind of thing?
Yes. So different things to different people. Like I always get the question, like, what do you say to a recruiter versus a hiring manager versus just an employee? And so I'd always have 3 different types of templates for like those types of people. But that was only when I was sending an email. If I was sending like a LinkedIn connection request, those are always pretty much the same. If I was sending it to someone who was in the same industry, but maybe not at a dream company, like that was like the bottom tier people that I was just kind of practicing networking with, I would always focus on the industry. So I'm really interested in this industry to use these skills. And if I was focusing on someone that worked in my dream company, then I would most likely have a role or a department in mind. So I would mention it like, I'm really interested in working at so-and-so company, specifically in this department, using these skills. And yeah, so I ended up having like at least 5 different templates for different types of people, even email templates, because marketing yourself via email, I would say like your networking email should be like a cover letter. And so like a mini cover letter, basically just explaining why you're reaching out to them, and what you're hoping to get from your conversation with them. And I have a bunch of templates in my ebook. And so that was kind of what helped me to like reach out to people and get responses, because it's not just reaching out if no one's responding to you. And so I found that it's really how well you sell yourself that it's able to increase like how people like respond to you, and if they even like accept your connection request, if they even end up responding to you. And so most of the times I would set up like Zoom calls or like Google Meet or using like AWS Chime. And I usually would set up 30-minute calls, but I feel like maybe that was just for the time that we were in. I think people were more willing to do 30-minute calls during COVID because everyone had just gone on lockdown and had like more time on their hands. Nowadays, I'm hearing like 15, 20-minute calls. So I would ask the person that you just reached out to, ask them if they wouldn't mind a 15 or 30-minute call, and like help them make the call based on their schedule.
Perfect. And you mentioned the goal there, as in, what you're looking to get out of it. I think that's the trickiest part, right? Because you don't want to sound too desperate and, oh, I'm only contacting you because I want a job in your company. So how did you get around that? Because, well, you've already said, you go for Google, let's say, and say specifically, I'm interested in this division, this team, I want these skills. So I get that part because that gives it the context. But then what do you say you're trying to get out of the 30-minute call to get them to want to have it with you? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So it's so interesting because when I first started networking, I wasn't networking for a job. And so that kind of made it a lot easier because I was literally just networking to learn more about the company or the industry. And so that's actually how I realized that like it's better for you to just say, I'd love to learn more about your department, or learn more about what you do in your team, or learn more about how, if they have an interesting background. Like I noticed a lot of these product marketers end up going to product management. And so that might be something that you're interested in. Like I'd love to learn more about how you're able to switch from a non-technical background to technical. And you can obviously find that out just by looking through their LinkedIn page. But even without looking through their LinkedIn page, just saying, I'd love to learn more about this industry, or how, for example, how Apple is currently breaking down barriers in the health world, or how you're able to create this. Like it's just, it doesn't have to be too deep. Just saying that you'd like to learn about the industry that you're both in is what's important. And that's why it's important to connect with people that are in that industry. There's no point in reaching out to a marketing person and saying, I'd love to learn about how you're able to break into software engineering at Apple when they work in marketing. And so you want to make sure that you're able to like filter down who you're searching for on LinkedIn by like the actual profession, and making sure you're not reaching out to someone who has nothing to do with the profession.
Perfect. Yeah. So it's like you've got to be curious, you've got to be inquisitive, and really clear on the direction you want to go in your career. Then that makes a lot of sense. I hope a lot of people now have listened to that and are really going to dive into networking, because I think it's been a very difficult job market, of course, the last 18 months or so. And sometimes it's almost easy to blame that on you not getting offers or making progress. And I think that is a big part of it for sure. But then it's also important to understand, and if we want to be really honest with ourselves, some candidates are doing other things to say, and basically saying, I really want to work here. I'm going to really, really focus and see what I can do. And that basically means networking early on, like before you actually even need the job, maybe creating content if you're going to go really extreme, and taking the time to research and learn how to actually get a job at this company by, listen to this podcast if you want a job at McKinsey or anywhere for that matter. So that's the real extreme. So, and hopefully that gives people confidence, because as I said in the beginning, you didn't have the biggest network in the world, you didn't know everyone, and you were able to do it. So there's no reason why anyone listening to this who is, currently studying or has left college or whatever, can then just jump onto LinkedIn. Do you have any advice for the profile actually before we kind of move on? Because I think the better your profile, the more likely you are to get responses, right? So any advice on that?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be too deep. I think people are always like, oh, have a header, have this. Like when I have my entire networking journey last summer, I didn't even have a header. Just have a good picture. Make sure the picture doesn't look like something you could also. I mean, it could be something that you post on LinkedIn, Instagram, depending on how your Instagram is. But like, just like a good picture is always good. Like a clear picture, and then have your experience listed, and have a short summary in your About Me section. I know some people try to like people that have like more extensive careers have more extensive About Me sections. But I always tell the students that I'm mentoring to try to keep it short and sweet. Explain your skills, explain your background, explain what you're looking for, your like target industry, your target role. I no need to make it like a mini book expert. Like it's, I don't know. I kind of have mixed feelings about that. I prefer keeping it short and sweet because I think we're living in an age where no one wants to read a book, and that's why short content is so like marketable, and it's doing so well on Instagram and TikTok and even LinkedIn. The posts that you see that go super viral are always like super short, and so because people have short attention spans, and if people are going on your LinkedIn profile, they're probably going on your LinkedIn profile during office hours, so they might have a call to jump on in like 3 minutes. There's no need to make them read a really long post, so they probably won't read the really long post. Let's be really honest. Like I've never actually read a really long About Me section. I read the short ones, or I read the first 2 lines and the last 2 lines, like the beginning of the book. So like just bypass that and just keep it like at least like minimum. I'd say like maximum would be 15 sentences. I think mine is like not even up to 10, but I would say like max is 15 sentences.
Nice. How come you're writing an ebook then if no one reads books anymore? What are you doing?
Because my ebook is that's a good question. My ebook is template. So it's basically like I found that like I was mentoring students, but it was becoming really repetitive for me and redundant. Like I'd have back-to-back calls, and I would literally just be saying the exact same thing. And so I'm going to start work soon, and I'm not going to have time to meet up with everyone. So an ebook it's literally 40 pages. So it's not even like, I don't even think that's like a real book. And it's an ebook because you can copy and paste the templates. So like most of it is like templates. So like things that you can copy and paste into LinkedIn, or you're writing a networking email. And so it's not really a storybook. It's more like, it's literally like action points, like do this, and then you like check, and then do that. And so it's like very just like short and sweet.
That sounds perfect. I'm definitely gonna cop one of those, definitely. Brilliant. And just a quick lesson there, because we obviously haven't spoken much about applications because you don't like to apply to anything. So we've skipped over that a lot. But, if there's one takeaway, it's a nugget in what you just said there about the profiles, which is, short and sweet, and get your point across very, very clearly. I keep looking at really long CVs and really long cover letters. And to Somebi's point, recruiters are the same, employers are the same. They don't want to read through loads of unnecessary information about your life story. They just want the key information. So try and keep it kind of short and sweet. Imposter syndrome then. So let's touch on that, because I was watching your TEDx earlier, and that's something that you touched on there. And that surprises me, because you seem like the most confident person in the world, knocking on everyone's door and, getting offers at all these places. And I think this is interesting, right? Like, someone who hears about your journey and what you've achieved probably would think, you're like a cyborg who doesn't feel those feelings. But let's demystify that a little bit, because I also talk about this a little bit on the podcast, which is like people only really sharing their real highlights on LinkedIn and Instagram, and not the lowlights, which is bad, because then it's like that perpetuates that problem of people think they can't do it because they're different, quote unquote. So yeah, tell me about that. Tell me about the imposter syndrome. I'm intrigued about that.
I definitely plan on because like you're right, I'm talking about my imposter syndrome that I faced at Geotab, which was my first paid internship, and my imposter syndrome at Deloitte, and obviously like it's hindsight, like I'm done with those, so I can talk about it more freely now. And I know I'm probably going to experience imposter syndrome at McKinsey, and that's something I want to kind of break down the barriers and actually talk about what you're going through as you're going through it, because you're right, people and students especially, because that's obviously our target audience, and it's going to be so sad if they think that, oh, she's fine, and so they think that they should be fine too, but really you never know what someone's going through. And really the only people that knew that I was really like suffering, quote unquote, were like my parents, who I would speak to about what I was going through. And I also actually wrote a blog post about this, is that I don't necessarily know if imposter syndrome is even like a bad thing, depending on how far you let it go. The imposter syndrome that I faced at Geotab, my first paid internship, the one where I drove around, my parents didn't know that I was using their car, that wasn't bad imposter syndrome, because it really like forced me and like pushed me to like improve my coding skills and like try to like get on par with my other colleagues and improve on myself. But the imposter syndrome that I faced at Deloitte was when it really went too far, because I wasn't sleeping and I couldn't sleep no matter what I tried. And so I'd literally be going into work every day, like not having slept a wink the night before. And so that was when I think it got too far. And the only thing that I could really advise myself, even looking back, I'm like, what could I have done differently? And it's like one, never think that you're going into anywhere with other people being better than you are. And I think that's the mentality part of things, is that if you already walk into like Geotab, I didn't know the company or the people. So my imposter syndrome was really based off of what I was seeing day to day. Deloitte, I was going in knowing what Deloitte was and who Deloitte hired and like the caliber of people. And so that was already kind of like messing me up, being like, oh my God, like there's no way I deserve to be like with these people. And so try to demystify it and realize that like everyone started off exactly where you are. And so that would be the one big tip that I would give myself and anyone else that's in the position, is like, even myself, that I'm going into McKinsey, and like I thought McKinsey only like hired like Ivy League MBA grads. And it's like, realize that everyone started off exactly where you were, and people for the most part are just making stuff up as they go and like trying to figure out this crazy thing called life. And so yeah, it's honestly like it's one of the worst things to experience, but I don't think it's a terrible thing as long as you keep it under wraps. As long as you keep it like in control, because then it can only ever push you to be the better version of yourself. Like if I hadn't gone through the mini imposter syndrome that I went through at Geotab, I wouldn't be a good coder. You just have to make sure you don't let it get too far. You don't let it mess up kind of your day-to-day life and your mental health.
Yeah, no, I think that's so interesting. And it's one of the great things about doing this podcast. Like I get to kind of dive into these things a little bit more and meet really successful people, and the same, just through my business. And it's just, the funny thing is, the more people you talk about, every time you talk to someone like this, they explain the exact same thing, as in like, I didn't really think I belonged, like I went through this, I wasn't the best at this point. You hear that everywhere. So I'm starting to question who these high caliber people are who don't go through these things. I think they don't exist. I think everyone has like challenges and we're all just kind of winging it,
Yeah.
and mostly sharing our highlights. So I think that's so important to share.
One of the partners that I interviewed was at McKinsey was like, for the first 2 years, he went through like really, really bad like imposter syndrome, and it was really like crippling, similar to the one I went through at Deloitte. And it was so crazy because this is a partner that's obviously accomplished so much, and a partner at like the biggest firm in the world, and like you'd never expect for him to be so vulnerable and just kind of like tell a random person that he literally just met. And so that really like helped me. That was kind of my journey to understanding that, okay, so imposter syndrome, it's a spectrum, and you should never let it go to the point where it affects you in that kind of way. And he gave some really great advice on like how he managed it and what he would do differently, looking back. And so like it's exactly like what you said, like you have all these successful people, and like you realize that literally every successful person is virtually the same. Like everyone's made up of the same thing, which is not really understanding what's going on, making stuff up as you go, trying to do the best you can, and then going to sleep like everyone else.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm looking at someone and thinking, oh, they've got it figured out, and they're looking at someone else, and it's like, it's a domino effect.
Yeah.
Any more advice? I mean, we touched on a lot of things, but I want to give you a bit of space to share advice with students. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you want to share that people really need to be aware of, that you think could make a difference right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you kind of briefly touched on it. You said the time to apply. Like I started networking a year before I graduated. So I started networking mid-April. I graduated in May. I started networking mid-April of 2020. I graduated in May 2021. And so I gave myself that 12 months. And maybe that was a bit much, but like I said, I also had nothing to do for an entire summer. And yeah, like what's funny is that one of my big posts on TikTok, it was like, the number one thing students get wrong is waiting too long to start applying for jobs. Like you graduate and you're like, oh, now I need to start applying. Or it's a month before summer starts and you're like, oh, now I need to start looking for a summer internship. And it's like, all the comments were like, oh my God, this is like 2 years too late. I waited too long. I waited until I was finally graduated. And it's like, start looking for jobs while you're still a student, because A, like there's just more opportunities, like people are more willing to help you, and B, it alleviates the stress, because you graduate and like you might have student loans, or you might have a family that's dependent on you. Like, is it now you're going to start looking, or should you have started looking like at least 6 months ago? And I say 6 months as an average, but like 6 to 8 months would be the ideal. My younger sister started looking for her internship. She got 2 at LinkedIn and Cisco for summer and fall. And we both started looking like in September. My other younger sister, she just landed. She's working at GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. She just got an internship at Johnson & Johnson earlier last week or later last week. And we started looking like literally like May. Like when she started like her summer internship, we started looking for her fall internship.
Wow.
And so that was even like a bit, and that was only because she already had a network from before, from networking with Johnson & Johnson. If she didn't have a network, would have started like 8 months before. But because she already spent like literally like all of last summer networking with Johnson & Johnson, she kind of already had people to reach out to. And so that kind of gave us like a bit of a buffer room to only start looking 4 months before, because people start hiring 4 months before. I hope I'm making sense, because I realize that I'm talking fast, but it's like 4 months is already too steep, but because she'd already networked, she'd already saved herself 3 months. So really, it should be 7 months if you're just starting to network with a company. But if you already have the network, then you can kind of start like 4 to 3 months or 3 to 4 months before.
Yeah, and you know, the lesson here is partly like if you get rejected, if you don't get a job, it's like an appreciation for this is what the candidate who did get hired might have done. I started like focusing on this 7 months before, you know, the thing was even live. You know, that's what you're going up against. So I guess it's like try not to blame these external factors. Try and just get in as early as you can. Yeah, absolutely. It's like, you know, the phrase is dig the well before you're thirsty. That's the phrase when it comes to networking. You want to build up that rapport with people before you need them, because people prefer that to, oh, you're only reaching out to me now to get a job. So, you know, and you might be thinking, I've just graduated, Toby, this is useless. That, you know, the second best time to dig the well is right now, is today, right? So go out there and start networking if you haven't already.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's about controlling what you can control. Like my younger sister is she's in neuroscience, but she got a supply internship for Johnson & Johnson for the fall. And she was one of the top 2 candidates. The second candidate had a supply chain background, but they took a chance on her because she'd networked. So they knew a lot about her, and they liked her tenacity and like her audaciousness and her curiosity and how much she'd done so much research in supply chain. And so even when it's you versus potentially like the person that they maybe could have chosen who had the direct background, networking is really what pushes you over the top. And so she was really excited, and I was so proud of her because it shows that you don't always have to have the exact background they're looking for to be able to get these really great internships.
Perfect. So maybe I could talk to you about this for days, I think, but I've loved this episode. This has been amazing. Where can everyone find you? Let's talk ebooks. Let's talk TikTok. Where can everyone get to you? That fan is going off again. Where can everyone find you, Somebi?
Yes, I just over 2 months ago, I started my blog, Sit with Somebi, where I just talk about like life as a young professional. My blog is kind of a free-for-all. This past week, I talked about like self-depreciation. I talk about networking. I talk about job searching. I allow myself to kind of just be free in what I talk about. I talk about imposter syndrome. My TikTok and my Instagram are more so based on like job searching tips, just like short form content or post about like what you can do and like how you can strategize. And I'm actually hosting like a free LinkedIn webinar on the 22nd, just talking about LinkedIn, like similar to what we talked about, and talking about like resumes and stuff like that. And my ebook, I actually released it just over a month ago, like June 8th. And that was basically the book that I wish I'd had when I was networking and even job searching, things that I had learned, hindsight, like what I would do differently, what I would do now in this current climate. And like I mentioned earlier in our chat, like it's really like an action book. I wanted to call it a handbook, but it's also like an ebook, obviously, because it's really just like 40 pages, copy and paste everything I'm saying into like LinkedIn or who you're networking with. Because I've kind of been able to fine tune my networking strategy. And so rather than having other students struggle to fine tune theirs, they could just kind of like use mine, who's already kind of at the finish line, and like apply it to what they're doing currently. And so, yeah, it's a book that I definitely wish I'd had. And it's also a book that allows me to help as many people as possible, because it doesn't, I don't need to like actually meet with everyone, because that becomes really overwhelming when like you have too many people in your inbox asking for a meet. And so yeah, it's definitely something that I hope people pick up.
Nice one, nice one. You've gone from driving around, handing out your resume to being the one that's high in demand. So you've gone
Oh my
360.
gosh.
So
When you put
um,
it, I hope you don't blow up my head, because my mom is already, she already hates me.
or I should say 180, because 360 you'd start in the same place, but
That's
180. So send over the handles to me, the ebook. I'll put that in the show notes for the podcast and on YouTube. And yeah, let's leave it there. You're gonna have to be on again. And make sure everyone you subscribe, like, comment wherever you're listening. And yeah, we'll have some maybe on another time, I'm sure. So yeah, thanks so much, maybe.
And I forgot to mention, and when you actually subscribe to my blog, you get like 7 free interview preps. So like the thank you note you should leave, the top interview questions, how to answer them with my examples, and like a couple of other things. Networking email, the template. And so I just kind of like pick a lot of stuff that are high in demand that people want, that maybe they're not able to get my book, and I just kind of like give it for free when you subscribe. And so that's been really nice to like help people that way. But yeah, I'll definitely be on again. I feel like we can talk for hours.
For sure, for sure. All right, everyone, go and subscribe to Somebi's blog as well. That sounds incredible. So yeah, let's leave it there.